Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
It's great to be back.
We have an absolute marathon ahead of us today. I'm looking at a stack of 11 distinct pieces from the paper. And the range is honestly staggering.
It really is.
We're going from some really intense constitutional debates about what you can and cannot be forced to sing, all the way to the economics of nuclear liability, and then down to the microscopic details of breast cancer subtypes.
It's a real whirlwind tour. And, if I had to pick a theme for today, it might be something like hidden mechanisms.
Ooh, I like that. Go on.
We're seeing a lot of threads about the things working just beneath the surface, whether that's the hidden cost of insurance commissions, the hidden risks baked into these new nuclear laws, or even the hidden biological changes in cancer that don't just show up as a simple lump.
That's a great way to frame it. It's all about what's not immediately obvious.
Okay, we're going to have to move fast, so let's jump straight in. We are starting right at the top with the editorial section, Article 1, and this is a very, very heated debate kicking off regarding Vande Mataram. Right, so this all stems from a Ministry of Home Affairs order dated January 28, 2026. The order mandates the singing of all 6 stanzas of Vande Mataram at official functions.
And just for context, for anyone who might not know the full history, usually at, school assemblies or public events, we only ever hear the first 2 stanzas, correct?
Correct, and that's not an accident. The editorial argues that this new order is essentially a breach of what it calls a constitutional silence that is held for decades.
A constitutional silence. That's a powerful phrase.
It is, and to understand why this is so controversial, you really have to go back to 1937.
Okay, set the scene for us. What happened in 37?
Well, you had the Congress Working Committee meeting, and we're talking about the heavyweights here. Gandhi, Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, they all passed a unanimous resolution.
Right.
They decided to adopt only the first 2 stanzas as the national song. And the reason was very, very specific. The later stanzas of the poem explicitly invoke Hindu deities.
Specifically Durga and Lakshmi, if I remember correctly.
Yes, exactly. One verse literally describes the motherland as Davam hi Durga dasa prahanadarini, which translates to, you are Durga, wielder of the 10 weapons.
Okay, that's pretty explicit.
It is. And the Founding Fathers, and even figures like Rabindranath Tagore, they felt that forcing people of other faiths, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, even atheists, to sing those specific lines would be imposing a religious test, not a patriotic one.
So the argument has always been that the first 2 stanzas are secular. They're about the rivers, the land, the bounty of nature, but the rest is undeniably religious in its invocation.
Precisely. And this distinction was carried forward and maintained by the Constituent Assembly when they were framing the Constitution. They gave national song status only to those first 2 stanzas, keeping it distinct from the national anthem, Jana Gana Mana.
And legally, this distinction really matters, doesn't it? The editorial points at the difference in legal protection.
It's a huge legal distinction. The Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act from 1971, it protects the anthem and the flag. It does not actually cover the national song.
That's a key detail. But the editorial brings up a specific Supreme Court case that I found really fascinating. The Bijou Emanuel case from 1986.
This is the absolute cornerstone of the legal argument here. It's a landmark case. It involved 3 children who were Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
They were expelled from their school in Kerala for not singing the national anthem.
Right.
Now, they stood up respectfully. They showed all due deference, but they didn't sing because their faith, as they interpreted it, didn't allow them to participate in that kind of ritual.
And the court backed them up.
They did, unequivocally. Justice O. Chantasira Reddy, in the very famous judgment, ruled that, and I'm paraphrasing here, proper respect is shown to the national anthem by standing up. It will not be right to say that disrespect is shown by not joining in the singing.
So the principle established was that you cannot force a citizen to participate in a ritual that violates their conscience. It's about participation versus respect.
Exactly, the freedom of conscience. So, the logic follows. If you can't be forced to sing the legally protected anthem, you definitely can't be forced to sing the national song, and especially not the parts that were deliberately and thoughtfully excluded by the founders for secular reasons.
So the editorial's core point is that this isn't about patriotism versus a lack of it.
Not at all.
It's about the state forcing citizens to participate in what is effectively a religious observance, which directly violates Article 25 of the Constitution, the freedom of conscience. The piece actually calls it constitutional vandalism dressed up in national pride.
A very strong closing statement.
It is a heavy start, but let's pivot to something that hits the wallet directly. Article 2 is looking at life insurance, and the headline suggests there's a crisis brewing with commissions.
There is. The data from fiscal year 2025 is quite alarming when you dig into it. Commission payouts across the industry surged by a huge 18%.
18%. And what about the actual business growth?
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
The premiums themselves only grew by 6.7%.
Wait, hold on. So the cost of selling the insurance is growing nearly 3 times faster than the business itself.
Exactly. And that money has to come from somewhere. Ultimately, it erodes the value for the policyholder. But what's really fascinating is the split in the industry.
What do you mean?
If you look at the public sector, specifically LIC, their commission ratio actually declined. It went down to 5.17%.
Okay, so LIC is managing to keep its costs down. So who is driving this surge?
It's the private insurers, specifically those who are heavily reliant on the bancassurance model. That's selling insurance policies through bank branches. Their commission ratios jumped to almost 9%.
So nearly double that of LIC. Why the huge difference? What is it about selling through banks that's so expensive?
It all comes down to one thing: bargaining power. LIC primarily uses a vast network of individual agents, but private insurers are often beholden to massive banks to get access to their customer base.
I see. So the banks control the customers.
They control the customers, the relationship, the data, so they can demand higher and higher payouts, higher commissions. The article points out that insurers have high switching costs. They can't just easily unplug from a partnership with a major bank, so they have little choice but to pay up.
And the editorial mentions that some recent regulations might have actually backfired.
Yes, it's talking about the shift to expenses of management, or EOM caps. The intention was good. It's supposed to limit overall costs. But what it's done in practice is just make these high commission costs more transparent. It hasn't actually done anything to reduce the fundamental bargaining power of the banks.
So at the end of the day, high distribution costs are just eating into the value of insurance for the average Indian, which is terrible news if you're trying to increase insurance penetration in the country.
It's a huge structural problem.
Okay, let's move to the third editorial, Article 3. We're talking about pulses dal, a staple of the Indian diet. Why is there a crisis here?
It's that classic, almost intractable tension between keeping food prices low for consumers and ensuring farmers get a decent income.
The push and pull.
Exactly. And recently, there was a controversy over a trade deal where India agreed to purchase a significant quantity of pulses from the U.S.
And farmers are obviously unhappy because they fear a flood of cheap imports will drive down local prices right around their harvest time.
Right. But if you look at the underlying numbers, you see the real cycle. India's demand for pulses is about 3 crore tons a year. Our domestic output is only around 2.5 crore tons. We have to import. The editorial argues this is a self-inflicted wound.
A self-inflicted wound because we aren't supporting our own pulse farmers enough.
Precisely. Unlike rice or wheat, where there's a very strong minimum support price, the MSP, and a robust government procurement system, pulses are basically neglected.
The article has some shocking numbers on that.
It does. Only about 2.9% to 12.4% of the total pulse production actually gets procured by the government at MSP.
That is a tiny, tiny fraction.
It's minuscule. So what happens? Farmers don't want to invest in growing more pulses because it's incredibly risky. It's mostly grown in rain-fed areas, the yield can be unpredictable, and there's no real price guarantee at the end of it.
So production stays low, our dependency on imports grows, and the cycle just continues.
It's a vicious cycle. The editorial concludes that just, tweaking trade deals or removing objectionable words from agreements with the U.S. isn't the real fix. What we need is deep structural reform, a guaranteed MSP for pulses, and better infrastructure for irrigation and storage to actually achieve self-sufficiency.
Moving now into the opinion section with Article 4, we're taking on a very political slogan that you hear all the time, the double-engine government.
Right. This is the concept promoted very heavily by Prime Minister Modi. The idea that having the same political party in power at the center and in a state leads to better, more efficient growth.
A friction-free system is the implication. But does the data actually bear that out? This article features analysis from 2 well-known experts, Luis Tellin and Yamini Iyer. What's their take?
Well, they essentially dismantle the idea on 2 fronts. First, the economic reality, and second, the constitutional principle.
Okay, let's start with economics.
They point out that while the rule-bound financial transfers, things mandated by the Finance Commission, are mostly unbiased and go to all states as per the formula, it's the discretionary transfers where the politics really come into play.
You mean things like centrally sponsored schemes?
Exactly. And they find evidence that opposition-ruled states often face unexplained delays or hurdles in getting those funds released. So there is some friction if you aren't a double engine.
But the article argues that the bigger problem is the principle of it, right? The idea itself.
Yes, this is their main point. The experts argue that the whole premise undermines the spirit of federalism. Our Constitution is specifically designed to accommodate political and cultural diversity. The rhetoric of double engine implies that having different parties in power is somehow inefficient or undesirable, which goes against the democratic will of the people in different states.
And they bring up what they call the Southern paradox to counter this idea.
This is probably the strongest counter-argument to the whole double-engine theory. The southern states, which are very frequently not ruled by the same party as the center, consistently have significantly better socioeconomic indicators. Better health, better education, higher GDP per capita.
So how did they achieve all that without the benefit of the double engine?
History. The experts argue it's not about short-term political alignment. It's about a long-term historical focus on social justice, on land ownership reforms, and a deep-rooted investment in education that dates back decades, long before this slogan was coined.
So it's about structural foundations built over time.
Exactly. And the article suggests the real issue facing states today isn't whether they are double engine or single engine, but the fact that all states, regardless of who is in power, are seeing their fiscal autonomy shrink. Things like GST and the proliferation of cesses mean the center controls more of the revenue, leaving less for everyone.
So the engine type doesn't really matter if the fuel tank, the state's own finances, is shrinking for everyone. That's a crucial perspective.
A very crucial perspective.
Let's shift gears completely now. We're moving to the science section, Article 5. And this is a really, really important one about breast cancer. The headline itself is powerful. Beyond the lump.
This is vital information that needs to be more widely known. The common, almost universal perception is that breast cancer equals a lump. You check for a lump. But this article, written by an oncologist, makes it crystal clear that breast cancer is actually a family of different diseases.
So to be clear, not all breast cancers actually form lumps.
No, they don't. The most common type, which is called NST or no special type, usually does. That accounts for maybe 70 to 80% of cases. But then there's a really sneaky variant called invasive lobular carcinoma, or ILC. It accounts for about 10% of all cases.
What makes this so sneaky?
It's the way the cells grow. Instead of clumping together to form a distinct hard lump, the cancer cells in ILC line up in a single file, like soldiers marching. So instead of a lump, a woman might just notice a change in the breast's texture. It might feel heavy or full, or there might be a subtle dimpling or pulling in of the skin. And because it's not a discrete mass, it's much harder to spot on a standard mammogram.
That is terrifying, but it's so important for people to know that. And the article also talks about this spectrum of aggression, right?
Yes. It's not one size fits all. It explains you have some gentle types, like tubular or mucinous carcinoma, which are often very treatable with less aggressive therapy.
Okay.
But then you have highly aggressive types like micropapillary carcinoma, where the cells float in clusters and spread very easily to the lymph nodes, or metaplastic carcinoma, which is bizarre. The cells can look like bone or cartilage cells under a microscope, and they're notoriously resistant to standard chemo.
The article also mentions Phyllides tumors. I have to admit, I hadn't heard of these before.
They're quite rare. They have a distinct leaf-like architecture, which is where the name comes from. The key thing to know is they grow very, very rapidly. That's the red flag. They can be benign or malignant, but they're often mistaken for simple, non-cancerous fibroadenomas at first. The rapid growth is the sign that something is different.
And finally, a crucial reminder that this is not just a women's issue.
Correct. Male breast cancer is rare, but it is real, and it's often ignored or diagnosed late because of stigma and lack of awareness. Men need to watch for any lump behind the nipple, any unusual discharge, or any ulceration on the skin. The final message of the piece is that we need to shift from just checking for lumps to breast awareness, just knowing your own body, the normal texture and shape, and noticing any change.
Really important stuff. Now let's move to the text and context section. We have 3 heavy hitters here. Let's start with Article 6 and something called the SHANTI Act.
This is all about the new legislation that is opening up India's nuclear power sector to private companies. But the real controversy, the heart of the debate, is all about liability. Who pays if something goes terribly wrong?
And the article highlights 2 huge changes in this act, right?
Yes. The first is supplier indemnity. This effectively removes what's called the right of recourse.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that mean in simple terms?
In simple terms, if a nuclear reactor has a catastrophic failure because of a fundamental design defect, think of the GE-designed reactors at Fukushima, the operator of the plant pays the damages, not the supplier who designed and sold the faulty equipment.
That sounds incredibly risky for the operator and for the public.
It is, and it's compounded by the second change, which is the liability cap. The Act caps the operator's total liability at a specific figure, 300 million SDRs or special drawing rights, which works out to roughly 900 crore.
Is that a lot? In the context of a nuclear disaster, it doesn't sound like it.
It's not. It's a rounding error. The article puts it in stark contrast. The estimated cost of the Fukushima disaster was around 46 lakh crore. Chernobyl was 21 lakh crore. The cap in this new act covers less than 1% of the potential damage from a similar event.
Wow, that is an incredible statistic. So if a disaster on that scale happens, who pays the other 99%?
From the victims
Yeah.
and the taxpayers. The state would have to step in. The critique in the article is that this combination creates a massive moral hazard.
Meaning?
Meaning, by indemnifying the international suppliers from any fault and putting a tiny cap on the operator's liability, you are essentially encouraging risk-taking. It incentivizes the use of cheaper, potentially less safe designs because the financial consequences of failure are artificially limited. The article suggests this is largely driven by U.S. pressure to align India with international norms that are very friendly to suppliers.
A very sobering thought. Let's move from nuclear hazards to environmental ones. Article 7 discusses a major policy shift at Dal Lake in Kashmir.
This is a significant U-turn from the government. For years, the official plan was to relocate about 9,000 families who live in and on Dal Lake out of the area, with the idea of saving the lake's fragile ecosystem. That entire plan has now been shelved.
Why the change of heart?
To put it bluntly, it failed. The relocation colony they built, called Rebirth, was apparently in a flood-prone area. The facilities were poor, and in 17 years, they only managed to relocate 27% of the target families. It just wasn't working.
So what's the new approach?
It's called In-Situ conservation.
Meaning cleaning up the lake while the people continue to live there.
Exactly. It's a shift towards treating the longtime dwellers as an integral part of the lake's ecosystem, not as an intrusion to be removed. The lake is suffering terribly from untreated sewage, agricultural runoff, and encroachment.
So how do you fix that with people still there?
The new plan involves spending over 200 crore on building modern sewage treatment plants inside the hamlets on the lake, combined with extensive dredging and improving the water circulation. It's basically an admission that you can't just remove the people, so you have to invest in fixing the infrastructure around them.
A pragmatic shift, certainly. Now, for our third piece in this section, Article 8 takes a big step back to look at the whole world. It's titled, India's Strategic Pivot in a Fragmenting Global Order.
This is a deep geopolitical analysis. The core premise is that the old post-World War II order, the UN, the WTO, all those multilateral institutions, is eroding. It's becoming paralyzed and ineffective.
And where does that leave a country like India? For decades, we talked about strategic autonomy, right? Non-alignment.
The article argues that the very concept of strategic autonomy is becoming obsolete. The great power competition has changed. The U.S. and China aren't competing for votes at the UN anymore. They're in a fierce battle for dominance over technology, AI, and global supply chains. In this new world, the U.S. increasingly views India not as a non-aligned nation, but as a crucial swing state.
So if the old strategy is obsolete, what's the new one? What's the pivot?
The pivot is inward, towards a domestic focus. The article suggests replacing strategic autonomy with Viksit Bharat 2047, the goal of making India a developed country by its 100th anniversary. The new foreign policy should be an extension of that domestic goal.
And how does that translate into action?
It means becoming a cyber superpower. The argument is that India should leverage its massive young demographic to dominate in tech, software, and AI. That's the new currency of power.
And what about traditional foreign relations with, say, the U.S., Russia, China?
It calls for a very pragmatic balancing act. Maintain essential ties with all of them, the U.S., Russia, and China, despite intense U.S. pressure to isolate the other two.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it puts forward a radical idea for Pakistan.
Which is?
To reframe the relationship, to treat it not just as a security threat, but as a potential economic opportunity, thinking about pipelines, trade routes, something to stabilize relations.
Yeah.
And finally, to reposition BRICS primarily as an economic body, not a political anti-West bloc.
So it's a big move from a more idealistic foreign policy to one based on hard-nosed economic realism.
That's the core of the argument.
Speaking of economics, let's check the business section. Article 9 is about British universities setting up shop in India.
This is a really fascinating trend that's picking up steam. We have the University of Southampton opening a campus in Delhi, and the University of Surrey planning one in Gujarat's Gift City.
What's driving this sudden rush?
It's classic push and pull factors. The push is from the UK side. A lot of British universities are facing financial deficits at home, and the UK government has brought in stricter immigration rules, making it harder and more expensive to recruit international students to come to Britain.
And the pull?
The pull is India's massive and growing demand for higher education. The country needs an estimated 70 million new university places by 2035. The demand is huge.
So the British universities are thinking, if the students can't come to us, we'll go to the student.
Precisely. That's the model. And the big selling point is that you get a UK standard degree with the same curriculum and the same prestige for a fraction of the cost. The article quotes figures of around £10,000 to £12,000 a year here versus maybe £25,000 in the UK, plus you save on the huge living costs in London or Manchester.
It offers the prestige of the degree without the cost and hassle of migration. I do imagine, though, some students will miss out on the actual going abroad experience.
Some certainly will. That's a big part of the appeal for many. But for a growing number of families, the degree itself is the primary asset they're after.
Okay, Article 10 keeps us on this trail of global money. The headline says investors are now looking beyond American hegemony.
This is very much the Trump factor at play, or at least the uncertainty his policies inject into the global system. With U.S. policies becoming more isolationist and protectionist, talk of tariffs, trade wars, questioning security alliances, global investors are hedging their bets and looking elsewhere.
So where is the money going instead?
To so-called middle powers. Think Canada, the EU, Japan. Countries that are now focusing on their own self-reliance. We are seeing a clear shift in capital flows into non-U.S. equities.
Any specific sectors?
Two big ones are mentioned. European defense stocks are up a staggering 200% since 2022, largely driven by the need for security independence from the U.S., and the other is energy production, which is huge, driven both by the need for energy resilience and the massive new power demands of AI data centers.
It's a fascinating consequence. Political isolationism in the U.S. is directly driving financial diversification around the globe.
Exactly. And the numbers back it up. The article has a key stat that really jumped out at me. 73% of European companies beat their earnings expectations recently. The typical number is around 54%. It suggests the world is adapting very quickly to a less U.S.-centric global economy.
Finally, let's head to our own neighborhood with the last piece, Article 11 in the foreign section. It's about the political churn in South Asia.
Right. We have elections coming up or that have just happened in Bangladesh and Nepal, and both countries have seen massive youth-led uprisings recently.
And the article makes a very strong point about what caused these uprisings. It argues it wasn't just about politics or ideology, right?
No, not at its core. The author, who cites an editor from the journal Himmel South Asian, argues it was economics over politics. It was the soaring cost of living, food inflation, lack of jobs, a sense of economic desperation, very similar to what we saw explode in Sri Lanka, that really drove people into the streets.
And what's the political outlook now in these countries?
It's complicated. In Bangladesh, the BNP is seen as the frontrunner, but the expert quoted notes they have a problematic history that isn't so different from the ousted Awami League. And there are serious concerns about the influence of groups like Jamaat-e-Islami on women's rights. In Nepal, the prediction is just chaos and unpredictable results, with traditional parties likely to take a severe beating from new political forces.
And the article ends with a pretty sharp critique of India's role in all of this.
A very sharp one, yes. The source is quoted as saying that India's neighborhood-first policy has, by and large, failed, and that our relations with most of our neighbors are actually worse now than they were in 2014.
Why? What's the reason given for that?
The core argument is that New Delhi is increasingly subordinating its regional foreign policy interests to its domestic political narratives.
What does that mean in practice?
It means, for example, using foreign policy statements or actions to appeal to a domestic voter base. The article uses the phrase saffronizing complexities to describe it. And this approach, the source argues, generates significant anti-India sentiment in places like Nepal and the Maldives, even at a time when India is providing generous aid. The suggestion is that our own domestic politics is poisoning the regional well.
That brings us to the end of a very dense stack of articles. It's been a heavy mix today, from the right to remain silent in a school assembly to the loud noise of fragmenting global markets.
It has. You know, if I had to pull one single thread through all 11 pieces, it's that tension between stated policy and lived reality.
Mhm.
Whether it's an MHA order on a song versus the lived reality of a pluralistic constitution, or trade deals versus the reality for a farmer, or a slogan like strategic autonomy versus the reality of a messy, fragmented world, it feels like the rules are being rewritten everywhere and we're all just trying to find our footing.
And that is exactly why we do this deep dive. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.